So this holiday season came out and Namco has delighted us with a remake of Pac-Man World 2. This was one of those childhood games of mine that I played to the moon and back, but never actually finished because I was really bad at the game the entire time I had it. I could of course go into a personal story about this game another time, but seeing as how they took the original Pac-Man world and turned it into a very nice remake, I was curious to see what they did the second time around, with this game being a bit more elaborate than what I expected. I do want to point out real quick for this review, I am playing the Nintendo Switch 1 version of the game, purely because I don't feel like dealing with any game keycard nonsense and wanted this game physically. Which I also don't have a PS5, so bear with me. The caveat to all of this is that the Switch 1 version is, of course, the weakest version of the game to come out, and from my visual standpoint, there are plenty of instances in which the frame rates for NPCs and enemies drop noticeably unless you are directly besides them. It's a shame, because I really can't imagine this is a problem on any other platform, but even with that stipulation, I wouldn't really take points off of this, given that this was one of a couple of options I did have. Though I will say real quick, if I am going to buy a game that's digitally dependent anyways, I'll just buy it on Steam where I don't have the choice. I go to consoles for physical media because that's what I've always done. Despite having games on those devices that are digital, I'd rather have a hard copy. Moving on, this remake is a little weird by comparison to what came before. The remake of Pac-Man World 1 was very by the numbers, adding quality of life improvements to things that were jarring even back then on the PlayStation 1. And while that sentiment is certainly carried over here for the sequel, it feels like a weird middle ground, where it's still the same game, but there's so many changes over the course of it that at times it feels like I'm playing a game that I don't recognize. That feeling is not across the entire board, but as early as Pac-Town at the start of the game, the level itself is the same conceptually, but instead of just a big town area with a couple of houses, you now have a completely revamped area that gradually opens up as you play the game, with many more NPCs and houses that really don't do anything outside of just being a way to reach other obstacles that you got to collect. On the upside, they've added a gachapon system into the game that isn't intrusive, and the delightful part about it is that you can use those unlockables you get from the gachapon to customize the town with statues and figures, and you can use them as a way to get the other fruit items around the area. To quickly explain the gachapon system, they kind of repurposed how the Namco tokens worked from the original game, whereas before you would use the Namco tokens to unlock things like legacy Pac-Man games in the arcade room, and now you more or less just use those purely for the gachapon. The arcade to play all the legacy Pac-Man games is still there, but there's only 3 this time around. You get the normal Pac-Man, you get Pac-Attack, and a third one that I can't remember off the top of my head, and it's a shame. I do wish a lot of those were still in there, but I get why, just knowing how many different versions of Namco collections or even Pac-Man collections are currently available on modern machines. It's a shame because that was honestly how I got to play a lot of classic Pac-Man games as a child, and why I went so far out of my way to make sure I got every token. I wanted to play Pac-Attack, man. I wanted to play Pac-Mania, and that's, it's still there, but it's not the same. In order to get the arcade games that are still there, you have to complete little challenges at certain points in the game. And while for the most part, every stage does have 3 challenges that you have to clear in order to get a new skin for Pac-Man, but every now and then, one of them is the arcade games. And off the top of my head, I seem to remember they're tied to the boss fights, where it's things like, oh, beat this boss without taking damage, while also beating it in under X amount of time, and some other third thing I'm forgetting. And, that's fine. It's just, I don't feel as motivated to do it, given just the convenience of popping in a different Pac-Man collection or Namco collection that I already own anyways. One last thing to point out on the note of Pac-Town, as well as the Switch 1 version's frame rate, is that the Pac-Town area is easily the biggest hiccup in my eyes regarding its performance. The frame rate just dips from turning the camera, and really just feels like that's the one place it shouldn't have this issue, since it's not a high-fidelity game or a technically demanding area from any standpoint. It's a 3D platformer from the GameCube era that simply had its starting town that let you run around freely to get used to the controls. If the frame rate has got to be inconsistent anywhere, I'm a little baffled that this is where it's noticeable, as it's the very first thing you'll run into upon giving control of the character. But enough about rambling about the town. The game's overall performance does feel nice in the quick moment-to-moment platforming, and once you go to World 2, this is where I really remember spending most of my time with the game as a child, and now, in the remake, it's where I feel a lot of the quality of life improvements are implemented. Specifically, a lot of people wanted free camera control, and I played it expecting it to feel a bit more natural than it turned out being, but I kind of had this weird middle ground where I expected it to feel more or less identical, as the camera was not in the player's control at all. I found myself stopping more often than not, just having to turn the camera around in order to make jumps, as you're constantly just going from thin platform to platform. I mean, you're climbing up trees. It shouldn't be that difficult, I know. And really, I feel like just having a highlighted shadow where Pac-Man is going to fall would have been plenty, but I don't want to look a gift horse in the mouth. Fortunately, if you're like me and enjoy the camera just doing its own thing, showing you what you need to know, there is a toggleable option that you can switch to in the settings that allows the camera to do just that, and it can even be altered to still let you control it despite all of that, nudging you along just the right way, but not constraining you to only seeing it through that perspective. This time around, the boss fights got reworked, which feel much harder than I would have initially thought for this game. Maybe a lot of folks in a survey somewhere regarding the previous remake of Pac-Man World 1 said the bosses were too easy, and maybe Namco turned things around this time and made this one a little harder by extension, but I kind of expected myself to just blaze through everything, and much to my amusement, I still had to try despite that. Even as early as the first boss fight against Clyde at the start of the game, I almost died the first time I tried it simply because I had to more or less relearn how to fight him. All the boss fights got reworked this time around, it seemed. Supposedly, a number of these were intended to be in the original version of the game, but were cut for time constraints. So it is cool to see the developers finally get to realize what was envisioned back in the early 2000s. To backtrack just a little bit, on the note of unlocking different skins for Pac-Man, this is similar to how you get the arcade machines. You go into a level and have a set of challenges that you have to complete in order to unlock the item. Kid me would have loved this feature, but a lot of it does just boil down to 100%ing every stage anyways, like you ideally would do in a single run on your own. But that's just not really what I jumped into this for. It's a nice addition that's there for the people who want it, so I don't want to be too harsh about it, but something about this remake is just off ever so slightly that it leaves me wanting to be a tourist more or less, doing the bare minimum and seeing all the parts I remember as a kid, and then move on after the credits roll. I wish I could put my finger on it better than that, because this is not a bad remake by any means. Something just feels like it's missing, and I can't quite figure out what that is. On an amusing note, the dialogue was completely rewritten, and the voice cast was redone altogether. Despite immediately hearing the intro cutscene from the GameCube version in my head as I was watching it, the writers clearly had some fun with it, and hearing Pac-Man's old voice actor from Pac-Man World 3 reprise his role is definitely a welcome touch, as I got the sense he was more than willing to give it his all.
Had enough yet? Maybe you feel like handing over the golden fruit now.
You're no pushover. I'll give you that, Pac-Man. All right, that's enough playing around. Time for my ace in the hole. No more Mr. Nice Clyde.
Hey, hold on. Where are you sticking that golden fruit? Clyde?
It's subtle, but I like it a lot. Time trial mode is back, of course, which I really didn't find myself doing that much in the original game, simply because I would run through the action stages and try to 100% them all in one go, doing everything. But now, as an adult, I find myself just rushing through the stages and only 100%ing them if I just felt like it. Amusingly, thanks to the advancements of modern technology, there now are leaderboards for the time trial modes, so you can rank yourself among other players and your friends, just to add a little bit of personal satisfaction into the mix. By this point, I've covered all the big notes that anyone who's played the original version will immediately think about. Anyone picking this up just blind and wanting to play a Pac-Man game because that sounds fun, you'll be satisfied nonetheless. This is one of those remakes where the bulk of the audience playing it will more likely than not just be the folks who played it back then. I think most people are going to be walking away from this with good feelings, and even as I'm saying all this is a good product, there's just something about it I can't quite put my thumb on. With all that said and considered, I give Pac-Man World 2 Remake a 7 out of 10. It's solid, just not the runaway slam dunk that I guess I expected it to be. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Till then, everybody.